Welcome everyone to the May ordinary meeting of Norfolk Island Regional Council. I'll start the meeting by asking everyone to rise while the General Manager recites the statement of respect.
The Norfolk Island Regional Council promotes a climate of respect for all. We will endeavour to inspire in our community shared civic pride by valuing and protecting our unique culture and environment, both natural and built, for current and future generations. We, the administration and the staff of Norfolk Island Regional Council, undertake to act with honesty and integrity to conduct ourselves in a way that engenders trust and confidence in the decisions we make and the actions we take on behalf of the Norfolk Island community. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this island.
Thank you, and would you remain standing for a moment, please? I just have one condolence notice, and that is for Amy Elizabeth Sedgwick, who passed away in Sydney on the 1st of April 2022. Amy visited the island many times. She's the granddaughter of Dale Howe and a niece of Steve Reeves. And I ask everyone to observe a few moments of silence. Thank you. Please be seated. Mr. General Manager, are there any apologies?
Yeah.
No apologies. Any disclosures of interest?
No, there is not.
Thank you. I'll move to item 5.1, which is the confirmation of the minutes of the council meeting held on the 6th of April 2022. Mr. General Manager.
Now, before you, Mr. Administrator, is a true and accurate record of the minutes of the council meeting held on the 6th of April and recommended to be received.
Thank you. I have personally perused and checked the minutes, and I resolve that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 6th of April 2022 be received, taken as read and confirmed. And I will move now to item 6. Item 6 is the public access item. I'll give you an explanation of what's happening with that in a moment by way of an administrator's minute. But just to note that in relation to item 6, public access was held yesterday. There was one speaker who addressed council, Robin Adams, on the subject matter of item 12.1 on today's agenda. So I'll move to item 7, which is the administrator's minute. There is an administrator's minute that deals with an amendment to meeting procedures for public access, and I will read my minute. At the beginning of my term as administrator, I've made some adjustments to the public access component of the ordinary council meetings. By moving the public access to the Tuesday before the Wednesday ordinary meeting of council, I now have sufficient time to consider reasoned arguments and suggestions made by the community through this process. This minute today is a further adjustment to that procedure, while we fine-tune the process to achieve a better result for both the community and council. I hereby amend the closing time for submissions by the public to address council to 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning of the public access day. This will now provide additional time for the community to consider their submissions, with the public access component of the meeting commencing at 3 p.m. on the same Tuesday. In the business paper agenda, a notation will also appear to highlight that the public access is held at 3 p.m. on the preceding day, and the video recordings of the discussion are available from council's website. Further, council will advertise this change in its newsletter, website and Facebook pages. And I'll move now to item 8. Item 8 is there for reports from committees, and I note that there are no committee reports submitted to this meeting. Item 9 is reports from the General Manager. Mr General Manager, I note there are no GM reports submitted at this meeting. So that brings us to item 10, reports from the Manager Corporate and Finance, the first of which is item 10.1, a report on the review of transitional policies. Mr General Manager.
Thanks, Mr Administrator. Before you is a continuation of a number of reports that we've now put towards you over the last 3 months, and they are identifying former administration policy and guidelines that were carried across to the council, and it's on a process of reviewing. I'll ask the Manager of Corporate Finance to address which policies they are this month.
Thank you, Mr General Manager. Mr Administrator, as the General Manager detailed, this is the third month of 5 months whereby we are reviewing what were 26 transition policies of the former administration. For the current month, the policies under review were the infection and health control policy, the reimbursement of contractor and consultant out-of-pocket expenses policy, the portable electric equipment safety policy, the relocation of buildings containing asbestos policy, and the safe asbestos removal and disposal. The process of review is to identify the objectives of these transition policies as compared to the objectives of existing NERC policies. On all of those occasions pertaining to those 5 policies, the objective of the transition policy is more than adequately covered in existing NERC policies. In this case, respectively, the work health and safety policy, the procurement policy, and also the existing planning and development legislation, particularly pertaining to relocating buildings containing asbestos. Mr Administrator, as such, the recommendation is that those 5 policies can be abolished as their content is adequately covered in existing policies.
Thank you, Mr Martin. And I note that there are attachments to the report which provide an explanation of what each of those policies covers and the reasons why the existing policies can now be abolished because their content is covered elsewhere. So I resolve that Council notes this report and endorses the abolition of the following ANI transition policies: the infection and health control policy, the reimbursement of contractor and consultant out-of-pocket expenses policy, the portable electric equipment safety policy, the relocating buildings containing asbestos policy, and the safe asbestos removal and disposal policy. So resolved, and I'll move now to item 10.2, which is a report on receivables and debt collection. Mr General Manager.
Thanks, Mr Administrator. This is a follow-up report from a decision that was made at the February 22 ordinary meeting, and I'll ask the Manager of Corporate Finance to give you the findings of that process and where to next.
Mr Martin.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. We brought a paper to Council in February outlining a plan to initiate debt collection procedures for old debt and to ensure that people on payment plans continue to be compliant. Following that, we issued put out an expression of interest for suitably qualified debt collectors to put forward their case to bid for the job, so to speak. That EOI was open until the 1st of April. We did not receive any submissions that met with our requirements. So, as such, we to date have not appointed a debt collection agency and or organisation. And I put forward that due consideration be given to authorising the General Manager to make direct approaches as appropriate to come up with a debt collection solution.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. So in summary from what you've just said, my understanding is that we've been to the market to try and identify or receive submissions from firms that are interested in providing this debt recovery service, and that didn't attract through the usual procurement process, didn't attract submissions. And what is proposed now is that the General Manager be authorised to make direct approaches within the market. I also note that there are two other items on the business paper today. There's a report that explains the status and progress that's been made in relation to EAFs. And there's another report that attaches a copy of the financial statements to the 30th of June 2021. And in both of those documents, first of all in the EAFs, it's pointed out to Council the importance of having tight control over its cash flow, and debt recovery is one of the significant items that assist Council with having sufficient cash as it needs as money flows in and flows out of the organisation. And I also note that one of the benchmarks that is expressed annually in the annual financial statements is an indication of Council's proportion of outstanding debts as at 30th of June in any year, and that our proportion is around the 23% mark, as we noted in earlier Council meetings, and that the standard benchmark applicable around New South Wales councils, which is a standard that we measure ourselves by here, is a maximum of 10%, so that we are more than double the amount of the benchmark. And that highlights the importance of getting some control over this. So I accept the advice that's been given, and I resolve that Council note this report and authorise the General Manager to make direct approaches as necessary to put in place an effective debt collection strategy to bring balances in line with established Council trading terms or approved payment plans. And I'll move now to item 10.3, which is the investment report to March 2022. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is the monthly report on investments, and as you can see, there's been little movement in cash between the last month, and so unless the manager has anything important to add to the thing, I suggest we can take any questions that you have of our cash position.
I have no questions. The unrestricted cash balance is 4.7 million according to the report, and the predicted unrestricted cash balance to the 30th of June 2022 is $6.2 million. And Council is working towards having a target of $8 million in working capital as advised by the NEXIA and the EAF processes. So we are, within reasonable limits. We are adhering to our targets, and those people who are regular viewers of the Council meeting will note that this is an important measure in terms of Council's ongoing viability, and particularly in relation to the fact that one of the reasons behind the institution of the public inquiry, and perhaps the major reason, was Council's facing an impecunious cash position. So I'm happy with the report, and I resolve that Council notes the information provided in the report, and I'll move to item 10.4, which is a report on the quarterly budget review at the 31st of March 2022. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. This is a much more detailed report of our financial position as at 31 March, and a number of other initiatives that are covered in this report. And I'll ask the Manager of Corporate Finance to address his report.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. The purpose of this report is to present to Council the quarterly budget review statement at 31 March 2022, outlining not only the financial performance of Council operations during the current financial year, but also any revisions against budget with recommended variations. The background goes through, I suppose, the legislative requirement to undertake the review, which is done once a quarter, what we have in summary on the table on page 35 is a review of where financial year started with a forecast operating surplus of $500,000. As at the 31st of March 2022, that full year surplus is forecast to be $404,000. That comprises of a downwards revision of $67,000 for the first 2 quarters of the financial year, and a further downward revision of $29,000 for pertaining to the third quarter. Certainly the Q2 budget review was put forward to council a few months ago. In terms of the adjustments required for the quarter at hand, they're not as broad as what was required in the first 2 quarters. I foresee an adjustment required to the annual wages bill as a function of not only the workforce changes that sort of happened late last year, but also other wage-related measures, together with an increase in contractors' fees, predominantly peak services, which is some of the outsourced finance and government arrangements, but also importantly some legal fees pertaining to the FOI requests that we've had to bear during the last financial year.
So just on that, if I could interrupt you,
yeah.
My understanding of the FOI, the cost of the FOI requests is about equivalent to the deterioration in the surplus situation for the year in round figures.
In round figures, it is, yes.
Right. I mean, there are other ups and downs,
Other ups and downs.
you have set out in the table.
Yeah.
But that one cost alone, had we not been facing the multitude of FOI requests, the net result may have been closer to the original predicted surplus.
That's
Right.
correct, Mr. Minister.
Or above, slightly above.
Okay, sorry I interrupted.
No, quite right. And recognising that there are obviously ups and downs all over the shop, but yes, you are quite correct. So from an operating perspective, at 31 March, we're looking at a forecast surplus of $404,000, and given that is reasonably in line with the original forecast, that's one of the reasons that forecast cash position can continue to stay around about, where it was forecast this time last year.
Right. Can you just explain to me the contribution that the additional depreciation over and above the original estimate is making to this, and what areas those depreciation costs relate mostly to?
Yep. And this was adjusted in the Q2 review. It's anticipated there will be $340,000 in depreciation as compared to what was forecast at the start of the year.
Can you pinpoint where that lies?
A large part of that is to do with the airport runway upgrade.
Right.
Yeah, a large part.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and it's fortunate then when you look at if that's largely an airport cost. I note there's a significant deterioration in the revenue from the airport as a result of the interruptions from
visitation,
visitation
in the first half of the financial year.
That fortunately the liquor bond has made a significant contribution to revenues that offsets a large part of those additional costs.
Yeah, that's correct. And what we've seen in the first quarter also is, visitation has come back very strongly, other than the first half of January. But so those airport revenues are picking up again.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I resolve that one, council notes the 21-22 Q3 budget review statements, income statement and operating forecast, and statement of capital expenditure. 2, council notes that at 31 March 2022, the projected 2021-22 year-end financial result is a surplus of $404,000. And 3, council notes that full year capital budget is now forecast to be $12,088,850 against an original budget amount of $7,187,581. And I should have mentioned that in the report, there's a reference to a CapEx table as being an attachment to the report. That report wasn't attached to the agenda, but it has now been provided to me and will be added to the business paper page of council's website so the community has access to it. Thank you. And I'll move now to item 10.5, which is a progress report on the external audit findings for council. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Again, this is our quarterly report to you to give you an update on our 113 external audit findings and the 7 broad findings from the public inquiry. This shows you in the attachment, which is a rather large document. We've had printed out an A3 for you. Updates for the 75 EAFs, 100 of the 113, the 82 short to medium terms that we've been addressing in the last three months. I do need to point out to you at the very back of the report is the public inquiry, which is pages 18 through to 22. We haven't provided any updates for this quarterly report as the majority of focus at the moment is on building the current budget and revenue policy that we will present to you later this month, and that starts to address a number of the public inquiry findings that you have there. So apologies that there's no update in this report for you from page 18 onwards for the public inquiry, but following presentations of draft budgets and draft revenue policies to you later this month, the next quarterly report that you receive on this will have significant upgrades.
Thank you.
There's another thing that that you pointed out to me earlier that I'd like to place on the record is that this report that we commenced a number of months ago now, probably a year ago, is a living document, and you'll see in the report that we keep adding to it each month, and there's probably a number of these at the beginning of the report that says not yet commenced is the very first line, and then the last line will say we've progressed or it's finalised or something. So what we need to do is we need to come up with a way of keeping the documentation of how we'll progress from quarter to quarter for you, but at the same time not probably trying to confuse our community who reads it, saying at the top not yet commenced and at the bottom says it's finished. So we need to come up with a better way of reporting that for you. But I just want to place that on the record for people that may be reviewing the council meeting as we stand right now, that will be placed as a priority for the next quarterly report. And I'll probably ask the Manager of Corporate Finance if there's anything else he wanted to add to this report. We'll take questions from you from progress on any of these EAFs.
I'm happy just to make some comments and move on. It's pleasing to see that we are progressing the EAFs. On page 40 of the business paper, there's a table that summarises the number of items on the list that have been completed, the number that are still in progress, and the number that are not yet commenced, and the proportions. You know, some of these matters are complex matters that require a lot of work, and I am aware of that. So it is pleasing to see the extent of the progress that has been made. I've taken your point about some of the information in the progress component of the table is old information, but the new information appears underneath it. So I get that, and it'll be good to see you date the way that is reported. And if I could ask on future reports if we could have the EAF numbers, which are probably in a column that's been hidden, so that you can actually fit it into the print size.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see those EAF numbers restored to the document. I make particular note, you mentioned, Mr. General Manager, at the outset of your comments, that this document started as a report on 113 external audit findings. And when the outcomes of the public inquiry were made known to us through the Commissioner's report, we took the initiative to identify, summarise the conclusions that came out of the report that required work to be done by council to improve its going. And a lot of those items appear on pages 18 to 22 of the attachment to this report. And I just want to make specific mention, because we are now, as you have correctly pointed out, we're in that operational planning 2022-23 budget process and the revenue policy process, that the deficiencies that came from the public inquiry that were referred to in the final report of the public inquiry that have been added to this list, most of them relate to councils or the former council's unwillingness to apply the revenue measures that were open to it through legislation, particularly through rating and fees and charges. The Commissioner was critical of the unwillingness of the council to implement the necessary measures to bring and keep the council at least in a break-even financial position. So those items are summarised at the back of this report, and I just want to give the community notice that over the next 4 to 6 weeks, the revenue policy will be prepared. It will come to an extraordinary council meeting towards the end of May. We can expect that in addressing the measures that are incorporated into this report, that there will be some recommendations coming to me and possibly some options about a fee, rating, a fee and charging mechanism for the next financial year that will address some of the shortcomings that were made clear to council through the report of the Commissioner on the public inquiry. Just want to get the community ready to understand that in addressing those things, you can expect that the approach will be that our business units will need to break even, so we will have to look very carefully at our fee and charge arrangements for that. And we need to implement a rating framework that covers the cost of council providing services to the community. So these things are coming up in the near future, and I'll just make a note of that. So resolve that council notes the progress of implementation of the 82 short to medium term EAFs as at 31 March 2022. And I'll move now to item 11.1, which is a report from the Manager Economic Development on the project status of the reintroduction of the Retail Price Index, or RPI, for Norfolk Island, which is one of the items covered by the external audit finding number 65. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. This is a pretty important report and measuring the changes that are having to be put in place and provided to our local community so that they're aware of, in actual terms, in figures placed before them, of what that RPI has increased over the number of years that we haven't had that done. Now, I'll hand to the Manager of Economic Development to explain her report, but this is a significant body of work, and it's really needed for not only the local community, but for also councils, because it's a guiding thing for our financial planning, and it's for our strategy for council, knowing these sorts of guiding figures, which are readily available to every other jurisdiction in Australia, and we haven't had them for the last 5 years. So that this is very important work, and I'd like to commend the manager for driving this so hard and working closely with the consultant over the last few months. And I think what before you today is a really good piece of work. So over to you, Manager.
Thank you.
So Ms McPheeters.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. This is just a quick update because this project is drawing to a close. From 1990 to 2011, Norfolk Island maintained its own retail price index, the equivalent of the CPI. We contracted Delta Pearl Partners in December. They've been working diligently in spite of COVID. They were on site in March, and we currently are closing out that project. The only outstanding action is to actually finalise the development of the dashboard to be able to report the quarterly RPI to the public. What DPI have achieved is quite significant. We now have an RPI for Norfolk Island that dates from 1990 to 2011, which was the original RPI. They've pulled together data from consultants ASOL Allen that did some work between 2012 and 2017. So we've got another body of RPI data, and then they've pulled together, they were on island in March, working with developing a new basket of goods, and have developed from that the RPI from 2017 to 2022. And that shows a significant increase in inflation on the island of 18.79% across those 5 years, which when you compare it to Australia, they're looking at 12 to 13% for the comparative period. Because they're using different data sources, they've smoothed out that data, and that gives us a regular quarterly RPI of 3.79%, slightly higher than the mainland. But exciting news, we'll be running our first collection of data for May to reinstate the RPI as a quarterly reporting process. So big project and exciting outcomes. I think it'll be a benefit to everyone.
Well, this is something I've been hearing about since I was engaged as administrator. It's good to see that it's reached the stage that it has, that you now have inflation index numbers to bring you or council or the island up to February 2022, and that work will continue to provide that information on a quarterly basis, and that the basket of goods has been updated and is detailed in the report. The report itself is really just stating the facts. It's self-explanatory, and there's some further explanation or summary of the salient points contained in your report, for which I am grateful. So I resolve that council note the current status of this project under EAF 65. And I'll move now to item 12.1, which is a report from the Manager Services on the electricity review update, funding and tariff introduction. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Again, this is another exciting report to the community because it's delivering on one of the 9-point strategy that we had in place from February 2020. Of reaching the target of 100% renewable energy. This comes off the back of last month when we lifted the solar moratorium. So 2 months in a row of pretty exciting news in this space of something that is a massive contributor to the high cost of living here on the island. So I'll ask the Manager of Services to address the report, but again, a really good piece of work.
Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Thank you, General Manager. So as the General Manager is just pointing to a target of 100% renewable energy by 2024 as one of the elements of the Council 9-point strategic plan that we've been focused on. In September of last year, Council appointed EPC Technologies to provide a technical and commercial feasibility roadmap to upgrade the electrical network and to progress this target. A report outlining EPC's model for upgrading the electrical network was provided to Council in the last meeting last month. This report identified that $5.3 million in Commonwealth funding is required to replace existing meters and provide monitoring and billing software across the island. Similarly, to provide additional storage capacity and also to undertake necessary upgrades to our electrical network right across the island. The Norfolk community will benefit from this project significantly through reduced costs and energy, with a variable tariff structure and the offer of subsidised solar and battery systems linked to the network and reduction in emissions from diesel generators. So the funding of 5.3 million required for this upgrade has been provided and confirmed in the 22 and 23 funding federal budget. Council was formally notified in the funding of this funding and letter from the Honourable Nola Marino, Assistant Manager for Regional Development Territories, on the 31st of March 2022. The funds are available and the project is proceeding, which is fantastic news for the island. The first part in this process is that we're going to replace the existing meters on the island. The rollout of the electricity meters is scheduled to begin in late July and is expected to run for 13 weeks across the island. A small team of technicians from the mainland will be on island for this time installing the meters, with each installation requiring a short service interruption for the consumers across the island. The objective is to replace the existing approximately 1,500 electricity meters with electronic meters that are connected to the network via the internet. The meters will communicate with a new monitoring and billing system, enabling residents to monitor their electricity usage and cost over the internet. This network will allow the introduction of differing electricity rates called dynamic tariffs that will apply at different times of the day, subject to the availability of solar energy generation across the island. What we're looking at here today, Mr. Administrator, is introducing the idea of new tariffs, and I'd like to walk through those new tariffs briefly with you today. So the new dynamic electricity tariff structure will take effect from the 1st of July 2022, and the proposed tariffs are like this. The daily supply charge is 50 cents per day. This is the old general infrastructure charge. This charge was previously $37 per quarter. The photovoltaic access to the grid daily supply charge is now 25 cents per kilowatt per day. This is the old development charge for solar infrastructure access. This charge was previously calculated at $26 multiplied by the total kilowatt capacity each quarter and part thereof. And this charge will be phased out significantly over time as renewable generation and storage increases across the island. The energy, diesel and use, which is the current charge at 72 cents. This is the old charge for electricity on the island currently. There is no increase to this charge at the moment, although we note that there is fuel increases at the moment that we've been talking about over the last 48 hours since this report was developed, and we'll look at that further over the coming month. This will continue to apply until the old meters have been replaced across the island. Then it will only apply when the diesel generators are operating. The new tariffs for consumption for solar power, which is the exciting part for the island, is that energy, when the battery is discharging, the kilowatt price will now be around 35 cents per kilowatt, which is a reduction in significant power of the island of less than half what it currently is. The tariff will apply when the battery is supplying power to the island. The energy system imbalance will be 20 cents per kilowatt. This tariff will apply when solar energy and the battery are supplying power to the island. Energy battery charging will be at 5 cents per kilowatt. This tariff will apply when the solar energy is supplying power to the island and the excess solar energy is charging the battery at the same time. And one unique part of this whole system is the solar overload kilowatt and energy supply at minus 20 cents. And this is a negative tariff and will only apply when there is more solar energy being generated than is required or can be absorbed by the batteries on the island. During this time, solar systems connected to the network will be switched off because generally we have too much power in the system. The electricity rebate for seniors will remain unchanged. It will be at $25 per quarter. And seniors 65 years and above, there will be one per residence that's applicable. In regards to the application of the tariffs, the new meters described as time and use meters are instructed by a software application named BESI, which tariff applies in advance of each half an hour based on the expected operation of the central power station. The tariff will be published on a website and can be sent to equipment programmed to respond to the price signal at the time. The introduction of dynamic tariffs in conjunction with BESI allows residents across Norfolk Island to be able to program internet-based equipment to respond to the tariff structure in real time. For example, if you have a pool pump or an electric vehicle charger, it can be instructed to switch off during the diesel in use tariff. With low prices known to occur when the sun is shining through solar, direct from use of electricity during sunshine hours is anticipated to increase. For example, price-sensitive residents can expect to run clothes washing machines or dishwashers during sunshine hours, and potentially in the future, we can introduce air conditioning and set air conditioning units to maintain temperatures across the day rather than address accumulated heat at the end of the day. Council has applied for funding also through the Australian Government and Australian Renewable Energy Agency, commonly known as ARENA, to assist in offering residents subsidised solar and battery systems that will link with the electricity network. The more solar generation installed on the island, the more time periods, the lower electricity tariff will apply. The more energy storage installed on the island, the less the island will be dependent on diesel generation over the long term. The important thing about this, and something that we've taken on board as a council, is our communication strategies with the new things that we're implementing across the island. So council have asked EPC Technologies to come on island to do a schedule of meetings from the week beginning of the 7th of June to explain the tariff structure to all those community members who would like to know more. So the focus of this visit is purely to provide information to residents, and we'll set EPC up in the places like the bowling clubs, Foodland, at the airport and different places of significance around the island. So governance and policy implications for the new tariffs, as that's implement the proposed tariffs with effect from the 1st of July. All time periods will be priced as the diesel and use tariff until 80% of the households have time and use meters, which will take a couple of months to roll out. And the financial implications at this time is that the project remains within the existing allocated budgets. A budget for Norfolk Island electricity for the 22-23 financial year was proposed. Tariffs proposed for 22-23 are detailed in this report and are designed to sustain Norfolk electricity over the long term. So at this point in time, Mr Administrator, Mr General Manager, and our recommendation is that Council notes the information provided in this report and that Council adopt the new tariff regime and that it be placed on public exhibition for 28 days.
Thank you. A few questions. I notice under the heading financial implications, you assure me that the project remains within the existing allocated budgets. So I take it from that you mean that if council implements the tariff regime, revenue which it will supply measured over a 12-month period will be sufficient to meet the costs of operating the electricity business.
That is correct. Yeah.
And are we looking at break even? Are we looking at surplus outcome, or are we looking at, I hope we're not looking at a deficit outcome. To what level will it fund it?
So it will fund to operational level, which will include depreciation. Right. So that's our aim for across the board for all of our business units.
Yep.
Is that revenue equals our operating day to day and depreciation. So if we're cash backing that, then that means in times of renewal, we will have cash in the bank to renew.
Okay. So we need the tariffs at these levels, some of which are very, very attractive, in order to cover all of our costs and have a break-even business unit that's funding its own depreciation.
The only stipulation we'll put there is mentioned by the manager was we were just advised in the last few days of new fuel prices. So we will have to go back to our consultant to recalculate, and that will probably only affect the diesel in use generation.
Well, you've preempted my next question.
Sorry.
Which was to be, will the table be revised? And given that there's a recommendation to put this table on public exhibition, I take it you would mean once you've calculated the effect of the fuel cost increases, whatever that effect is, that the table would be amended perhaps during the exhibition period if we get this out quickly.
Yeah.
But then we foreshadow there may be some amendment based on the very significant increases in diesel prices that we've just been notified about.
Yes, so there's one of two ways you can do it, exactly how you explained it then, or you hold until we place our revenue policy, which these tariffs will be included in the fees and charges section, and it can be, you can then be assured that we've included the adjustments for the change fuel prices.
Okay, well, I think that would be my preference to do that. So I resolve that council notes the information provided in this report. 2, that council adopt the draft. I'm just making some changes to what's printed here. That council adopt the draft tariff regime for inclusion in the 2022-2023, is the term revenue policy or revenue statement? Revenue policy. Revenue policy. Which will be on public exhibition for 28 days from late May.
Yep.
All right, I'll just read that again. 2, that council adopt the draft tariff regime for inclusion in the 2022-2023 revenue policy, which will be on public exhibition for 28 days from late May. Thank you. And I'll move to item 13. I note there are no reports from the Manager Planning and Environment. At item 14, there are no reports from the Manager Customer Services. At item 15, there are no notices of motion. That brings us to item 16, urgent business without notice. And I note there is one item which deals with the general purpose financial statements for the year ending 30th of June 2021. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is a late report that has come via the Audit Risk Management Committee that received and reviewed the audit report that was finally submitted from Pitcher Partners in late, what month are we in now? April. So in late April. So there was an extraordinary meeting of ARIC who has considered the audit report. There's no significant findings other than a clear audit. And before you is the finalised financial statements that we're now asking to be received and to be included in the annual report, which will be submitted to you for the June ordinary meeting.
Thank you. And can I just get you to confirm, because these financial statements are coming to council very late.
Yes.
In the ordinary cycle, we would have had these much earlier, and there are compliance requirements in terms of completion and finalisation of financial statements. Can I just get you to give me a clear understanding of the reasons for the delays?
Primarily COVID related, given that our auditors were based in Sydney and council had provided a draft financial statements to the auditors at the end of September, which is our
Statutory
timeframe. We've provided at the end of September. But given their schedule of audit and their resource challenges that they faced as well, they lost a lot of auditors during that period. So they were struggling to get out here in October, November. And then unfortunately, COVID hit in December. So that was December, January, most of February gone before we could realise that they just weren't going to come to Ireland. And so they did the entire audit remotely again. So that was the second year in a row they've done 2 completely remote audits. So there was significant challenges of going back and forth and providing things all the time, which you generally would get if auditors came on island, would get it done in a number of days, not weeks. The whole time through the process, we made sure that the Department of Infrastructure was advised of our tardiness in compliance, with making sure that we completed our statements by the end of November, which is, I think it's the due date's 30 November. We received 2 extensions from the department, but we didn't seek a third because we had been keeping them advised through the process. So we are hoping, Mr. Administrator, that the 30 June deadline that's coming up, we will be compliant this year, given that we will submit our statements prior to 30 September to the auditor that we have, and we're hoping that it is compliant and we're not asking for any extensions for next year. But these were unusual circumstances where both travelling to the island was difficult, but also resourcing of our auditor, our external auditor, found it very difficult to find people to do the audit. So they were the probably compelling issues that we had over the last 9 months.
Thank you. It's pleasing to see that council was able to comply with the statutory deadline in terms of completion of the accounts. It's disappointing to note that it then took from September to early April for the audit to be completed, and I understand the reasons that you've explained that relate to that. However, for a council such as ourselves that has been on the receiving end of considerable criticism for its approach to financial management, a repeat of this type of performance simply can't be acceptable to council. And we need to find a way to make sure that not only does council do the work that it has to do, but that the audit is completed in a much more compliant form than what we've experienced for this current year. So I'll leave that aspect of it.
Could I suggest an additional resolution that you ask for a report from myself back to you for June ordinary meeting to detail how we will
Comply with the next set.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good suggestion. So I will, just looking for the recommendation. I'll resolve 1, the council receives and adopts the audited general purpose financial statements for the year ending 30 June 2021 is tabled in a separate attachment to this report. And 2, that the General Manager provide a report to council or provide a report to the June council meeting
addressing the audit timeframe.
Addressing the audit timeframe for the 2021-22 accounts. I'll just read that again. Paragraph 2 is that the General Manager provide a report to the June council meeting addressing the proposed audit timeframe for the completion of the 2021-2022 accounts. And that takes us back to item 17. I note there are no confidential matters for consideration.
Not this month.
And there are no questions for the next meeting, which brings us to the close of the council meeting. Mr. General Manager, have I overlooked anything? Is there anything further?
Nothing further.
Then I declare the meeting closed at 2:54 p.m. And I thank everybody for their attendance.